Okay, evening guys, quick bit of content on the regenerating places module. So I thought I'd start with the utility of understanding low income and how that leads to loads of other social factors associated with deprivation. Let's go. First need to understand what the origin story is of low income, like why there's lower income in some places than others. And what we can start with is, first, economies are classified in different ways. That's the first thing we're introduced to in EQ1 of regeneration. And as I'm sure you can remember, economies are classified in percentages of the economy that will be classed as primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. The ones that we want to be concerned with are primarily secondary sector and tertiary sector at this stage. Obviously, what we've got is, in terms of our origin story, the secondary sector took a massive decline from the 1970s onwards as a consequence of the global shift. That is really important key theory for regenerating places. We're linking the globalization module to the regenerating places module. We're getting all synoptic. Now, because of the global shift, remember, one of the things we studied in terms of what the negative effects of the global shift was, this is where we're first introduced to an absolutely essential piece of core theory for the regenerating places module. It is the spiral of declines. Now we're going to go through that in a second. Now remember, the areas of the country or the areas in the UK that had the greatest proportions of secondary sector employment were in the north. Remember, one of those core concepts we're introduced to is location quotient. You have a location quotient that is above 1 for the manufacturing services, you would have been hit the most by the global shift, and then the spiral of decline would have taken place. So here is our spiral of decline. Boom! Spiral of decline. So what we've got is spiral of decline. Factory closure leads to unemployment, leads to decreased income, leads to outmigration. There's less spend on local business because there are less people in the area with an income source to spend on those local businesses. That then leads to business closure. We've obviously got then further unemployment, then we get vacancy and dereliction, and because we've got vacancy and dereliction, we have increased crime rates. Now overall for an area, that is going to massively decrease place perception. And when we have decreased place perception, the value of absolutely everything in the area goes down. And then we have a situation where a lot of people end up in negative equity. Remember that concept of negative equity. You buy a house for this much and now it's worth this much. So everyone's in negative equity. So it's that sense of being trapped in an area. But what we want to focus on here is obviously decreased income. So the link now is obviously the areas in the north of the country suffering disproportionately from decreased income. So why am I focusing on decreased income? Why is it so important to understand decreased income? Why is it so important to understand decreased income? To understand why we have negative social outcomes in certain places more than others. So I'm going to give you 3 paragraphs that you can use in your exams. So we're going to link low income to 3 negative social outcomes. We're going to link low income to poor physical health. Okay, so there it is, our first flow of development, our first chain of reasoning. So we go from low income, you're increasingly likely to live in a service deprived area. This area may be a food desert, so that means there's a lack of fresh produce, which means people are eating increasingly processed foods, which are high in fat, sugar, and salt. This can then lead to obesity, diabetes, and increased heart disease. And overall, that is going to lead to decreased life expectancy. Okay, so low income, poor physical health. Next up, we're going to go for low income on poor mental health. Low income, there's increased financial stress associated with the fact that you can't really cover the cost of living. That leads to increased anxiety and depression, possibly because there are increased strain on services in your area. Again, it might be a service deprived area where health provision is not as strong as it could be. That can lead to increased engagement in self-medicating behaviors such as alcohol and drugs. Now, not only will that have an increased impact on your physical health, so things like liver disease, certain types of cancers, you're also going to have decreased self-esteem. It's going to make anxiety and depression worse. You get in this loop, you get in this cycle. It's almost like a positive feedback mechanism. Finally, we're going to link low income to poor educational attainment. So we've got low income, you're more likely to live in rented accommodation in a poor condition, might contain damp and mold, increased respiratory conditions such as asthma, children's attendance at school drops, and that then decreases your attainment. And with decreased attainment, you're increasingly likely to be part of a low income family. If you are not degree qualified, that significantly decreases the likelihood of you being paid above average wage. So then we get in this intergenerational cycle of poverty, which is another absolutely crucial theory for you to commit to memory, the intergenerational cycle of poverty. Okay, so as ever with regen, the way that you're going to increase the level of your response is not only with theories, but including your AO1. So we need some case studies to go alongside this spiral of decline and this low income. What we tend to go for here is our most well-known unsuccessful places. Okay, the ones that I teach are Detroit and Hartlepool. So spiral of decline took place in both of these places. Detroit, known as the Rust Belt, obviously there was significant declines in the manufacturing of cars. So then that led to this spiral of decline because of the factory closure there. So what did that lead to? Firstly, there was out-migration, so it was around 1.8 million people there in the 1960s, and then there's around 640,000 people there today. Knock-on effect of that, 18% of commercial properties are now vacant. As we know, with there being increased vacancy and dereliction, there's increased crime, and your statistics for that are as follows. So violent crimes in Detroit are around 2,400 per 100,000 people, and then the US average is 395 per 100,000 people. So as you can see, massively above average concentrations there. So that gives you statistics that you can put forward for each step of the spiral of decline. Now, incomes in Detroit, last time I checked, were around an average of $22,000 per year. Not very good at all. So let's move on to Hartlepool. So with Hartlepool, less statistics, but average weekly wage was around £100 less per week than the national average. Now, if you want to link that to something else like educational attainment, around 20% of the population have a degree level qualification compared to the UK average, which I think is around 40% of the population which have a degree level qualification. 42% of the population have a degree level qualification. That's sometimes put forward as an NVQ level 4 qualification as well. So you can see that we've got evidence of the fact that low incomes can lead to crime, it can lead to poor educational attainment. Life expectancy in these places as well is pretty low, so life expectancy in Hartlepool is around 76 and the UK average is higher than that, so it's below average. So whatever you do, when you're linking low income to these other social factors, make sure that you've got statistics to back that up. You know my videos by now, you know that we're going to link this to a question. Here we go. 20 mark question is this. So evaluate the view. Okay, we're going down that deconstruction process. Evaluate the view that low income is the factor that most influences levels of deprivation. But remember, we break it down into our substructure like this, so we can agree with the view to a certain extent, and then on this side we want to disagree with the view. We've already got our 3 paragraphs that we're going to use on this side. So obviously we've got low income leading to poor mental health, and then we've got low income leading to poor physical health. Then we've got low income leading to poor educational attainment. So obviously theories that we're going to weave into this side to show the examiner that we've got a good range of knowledge. We're going to get in the spiral of decline on this side. Yeah, we can also get in intergenerational cycle of poverty. And other things that the examiner would probably want to see is reference to the indices of multiple deprivation. The indices of multiple deprivation, this is done at the neighborhood level, and it gives a weighting to the different statistics. And off the top of my head, I think it's 22.5% of the weighting is for income. That goes into your deprivation calculation. But it is quite significant, so that alone can be a good justification for how it is a really important factor. The main point we're making on this side is that low income has a knock-on effect on a variety of different social outcomes that would go into the deprivation calculation. Now, the tricky thing here is obviously we've got our AO2. We want to disagree with this. Now, you're going to take a slightly different tack with the AO2 on this side. So we want to try to disagree. Low income. With regeneration, it's probably easier to go for different factors. So it's easier in regenerating places to go down places route. So in some places, maybe low income isn't the most important thing. Maybe there's something actually behind the low income that means that low income was produced, making another factor more important, because what's the origin of low income? Let's take an example here. Okay, so somewhere like Blackpool. So we can maybe talk about global influences in the case of Blackpool. So in the case of Blackpool, obviously, a really good theoretical model that we've got here is the Butler model, and it's the decline of Victorian seaside tourist towns. Now obviously low income is a factor here. Blackpool's incomes are some of the lowest in the country. However, it was the global influence that actually led to the low income in the first place. Shrinking world technologies that were developed and became increasingly accessible to the rest of the world meant that people in the UK no longer holidayed in Blackpool. Not that they no longer holidayed in Blackpool, everyone loves a bit of Blackpool, but it meant that they visited there less and they were going to places like Spain. So visitation went down, and when visitation goes down, businesses close, and when businesses close, there's unemployment, and when there's unemployment, there's low income. So maybe we could argue that in some places, we need to consider it from the perspective of what's actually the origin story of low income, making something else more important. We could do the same with educational attainment, we could do the same with health, because there's a cyclical relationship between all the factors within the area of deprivation, so it's not so simple. So all the examiner would want to see is that you are discussing these things. Ultimately though, we've got to conclude. So in our conclusion, maybe we could say something like, because it's so heavily weighted and because it has the greatest knock-on effect on the greatest number of things, then we could maybe say that low income is the main factor within deprivation. When you increase people's incomes, you increase their life chances, you increase their quality of life, and then all the other factors that go into poor social outcomes will reduce. Okay, thank you very much. So sorry I rushed through that. I'm just trying to get off content as quickly as we possibly can before next Thursday. Any of you who are interested in the revision sessions that I'm doing, there's a link in my bio to the all-day paper 2 session, so check that out if you feel like you need that last minute, not last minute, but a few days before the exam full content overview. All right, see you tomorrow night.